depending on what quantum of vaccines we get. We are not developing a vaccine. We are not producing a vaccine, but we are part of the world effort, which is called the COVAX, where we pay significant sums of money in, like other countries, well over 100 countries, because what we understood and what is being advanced to the population of the world is that no country can isolate itself, inoculate itself, and be safe from the vaccine by its very nature and the nature of its transmission. And the WHO got the world's governments to agree that we'll all fund the research and the development of the vaccine. And when a vaccine becomes approved, when it becomes available and approved, that the wealthy and bigger countries don't just hug it, and that the poorer countries and smaller countries end up without it. In other words, it's not a question of who has corn feed only their fowls. The COVAX, there was a formula in COVAX which would allow everybody to get a certain percentage of what's available. And as different vaccines come on board and the availability should increase, the number of available vaccines should increase as the number of producers get approved. So far, there are 2 producers that have been approved, but they're both approved, one for US and the UK. And you're seeing in the news 2 things. One, the anticipated percentage that should have been available is not yet as available. Even in the United States, with a huge US government resource base, both in terms of finance, infrastructure, and personnel, they have fallen very short of what the approved vaccine was supposed to be in terms of, in fact, they have discovered in the handling of things that the actual logistics of getting the vaccine into arms is as big a problem as other aspects of the assignment. So now there are new efforts being made to address that, and we here in Trinidad and Tobago have the same issue. But since we don't have the vaccine, what we have is the preparation. We have been preparing and preparing and preparing that when we get ours. So that aspect of it where the amount of vaccines that are available is not what we expected it to be at this time. And also there's a hint that it is not going as fast as it should where it is supposed to go, even within one of the larger countries where the vaccine is being handled. And then there's a third hint, and that is that from what has been done so far, you're hearing complaints from some quarters that the formula is not working as smoothly as we thought it would work. So the result of that, you're seeing governors and other people saying, I was supposed to get a certain amount of vaccine. I'm not getting it. And it appears as though I'm not going to get it. And there's a lowering of the amount of vaccine that should have been available if the original formula was at work in the way it was intended to work. That is internally in the US. And with the COVAX now, you're hearing in Europe, some countries are accusing other countries of hugging it for their population, which is what we anticipated, and that is what drove the creation of the COVAX. It was exactly that kind of expectation that caused the COVAX to be available, to be established. One of our experts would have told our national population that we have been told that the COVAX availability would be with us sometime soon, and we are anticipating that through PAHO, our proportion will come to us. As of now, I cannot tell you what that number is like, given what I just said to you, that the number of available vaccines is not as clear-cut as it was supposed or expected to be in the global picture. I do not now know how much PAHO will have, but as soon as we have that information, Dr. Hines and Dr. Parasram and his team will give you that information because they are directly in contact, and I myself am waiting to hear what we can anticipate. And until we have it in our hand, we are simply anticipating that the process will work and allow us to access the vaccine. And of course, as soon as that becomes available, we will begin to vaccinate our most vulnerable population. And hopefully, we will get a sufficient quantity. And even more so, hopefully, those other producing or potential producers of vaccines who are on the verge of being approved, we are hoping that they get approval, like, for example, the Johnson & Johnson one that is supposed to be close. If they get approval, then that would add to the amount of vaccines available. If perchance it doesn't happen, well, you know what that means in terms of the knock-on effect. So we are all, Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of the world outside of maybe 2 or 3 major countries, we are all awaiting the approval of vaccines and the delivery of the actual vaccine. So that being said, Caricom was very concerned about that aspect of what I just mentioned. We had a Caricom heads of government meeting recently, and as you know, Trinidad and Tobago is chairing Caricom at this time. And one of the issues that came up in that heads of government meeting was this whole question of what can we expect of the COVAX? What are we seeing? Is it functioning? Is it that we have to make our voices heard? And in fact, we did. There was a release from the Caricom meeting to the world that we are concerned that small countries need to be taken care of in the distribution of whatever is available. So that's a Caricom position which went out as a result of our meeting. And we continue to monitor this and to stay there and talk to persons around the world who can assist us. As a matter of fact, there's a contact between us and the African Union who are offering to help us not be left behind. The Prime Minister of Barbados is in direct contact with some of our colleagues out there, and she's reporting to me, and we are talking on this, and we have agreed to accept the assistance that is offered by the African Union people who, because they are a larger bloc, they have a little more clout than we have, but they are concerned because of our diplomatic contact with them and expressing our concerns to them. They have reciprocated by making certain offers to us, which would assist us in not being left out. So there's a relationship building between Caricom and the large African group of countries that are in this whole world effort to get our populations inoculated. Another issue which has quietly come up, which is of concern to us, is the issue of the Venezuela-Guyana border dispute, which has flared up again. And again, this has become, immediately, it has become a Caricom issue, because as you know, Caricom has always been engaged in defense of Guyana's sovereignty and its territorial integrity, and now it falls to Trinidad and Tobago to speak for Caricom on this matter, and we have been so doing. We have issued, on behalf of Caricom, certain cautionary encouragements to the interested parties, holding to the principles of non-aggression and respect for international law and multilateralism as against unilateral behavior, and we've said so to Venezuela by way of Caricom, and Trinidad and Tobago in leading Caricom. At this time, our position is embedded in the Caricom position. I can tell you that our foreign minister has been in direct and continuous contact with the foreign minister of Venezuela, and we have also, from the office of the Prime Minister, we have been in contact with the Vice President's office in Venezuela with respect to the recent development where the Venezuelan government has seized 2 Venezuelan fishing vessels and their crews in certain marine territorial areas where Venezuela is saying that these Guyanese vessels have been operating in territory which is in dispute, and as a result of that they have taken them to Guiria. They have been arrested. Trinidad and Tobago officials at all levels have been persuading Venezuela to release these people, and so far they have not been released, but we anticipate that in the not too distant future this situation would abate, but if it does not, it is going to be an unpleasant development which has been attracting our attention night and day and will continue so to do. The arrest of these fishermen have to do with boundaries drawn on maps and complaints, thank you, complaints about who is claiming what. And as you know, Trinidad and Tobago share a boundary, a marine boundary, with Venezuela. And as we go east, our settled boundary, we come into the area of dispute with Guyana and Venezuela. So these two South American countries, the way they are interpreting their borders, have created certain occlusions, as Venezuela's complaint. Guyana is saying otherwise, but it's something taking place where our border, based on our settled arrangement, comes into discussion as to how these two South American countries can have access to the Atlantic Ocean without an occlusion on the part of any. So this matter is very active, and it is one that is attracting our attention on a continuous basis, diplomatically, both at the level of Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela, and Caricom and Venezuela, Guyana. The third matter that is of interest to us now is the Tobago House of Assembly election, which has surprised many of us, but you know, in the political arena, we ought not to be surprised, because we only have one vote apiece. It doesn't matter how aggressive and how long we've been in the arena. On election day, we're only responsible for one vote. The outcome in Tobago has been a bit of a surprise and has created some significant challenges. You would have seen this morning that the House met, or the elected people met in the House, and they, having been sworn in as assemblymen by the President, the next step was to elect a presiding officer. And then the next step after that would have been to elect a chief secretary and a deputy, and of course councillors appointed, 3 by the majority, 1 by the minority, and so on. I want to make sure that the record is straight on this, because I read The Guardian. I am one of the few politicians who own up to the fact that I read the papers every day. And in preparing to come to this press conference, in reading The Guardian, there's something that I have to address first and foremost. Because if I don't address it today, by tonight, I'm sure it's going to influence the news, and by tomorrow it's going to be fact in the print media. So I have to address it now as I address the Tobago situation. Now, if you, and it's on page 5 of The Guardian, where it says, Ramesh, Dumas, and Pandey weigh in on the conundrum. Fresh elections, the only way forward in the THA impasse. Well, now we know we have a THA impasse because they've met and they tried to do the first thing that they had to do, which is to elect a presiding officer, and they failed to do so because the 6-6 deadlock has now been demonstrated. But in the papers, my former parliamentary colleague, Senior Counsel Ramesh Lawrence Maraj, who was the Attorney General, I want to read for you 2 paragraphs in The Guardian which ascribes the point of view of Ramesh Maraj in this article. It says, Maraj said, when he drafted the legislation back in 1996, and he's referring here to the THA Act of 1996, he was the Attorney General of the government of the day. That was the 17-17-2 government. When the 2 Tobago seats became part of the government with the 17. He said, when he drafted the legislation back in 1996, as Attorney General, the aim was to give Tobago full autonomy, but the legislation had to be amended when the PNM did not agree to that Tobago autonomy. It was a different piece of legislation, but the PNM at that time said that they were not supporting the full internal self-governance for Tobago, and the original bill, which was drafted by me, was to give Tobago full internal self-government, but within the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, unquote. I want to make it abundantly clear, standing here as Prime Minister today and as political leader of the PNM, that after 25 years, I will ascribe to Mr. Mirage some fogginess of memory. I myself can be subjected to that. I know what that is. Something that you handled 25 years ago. It is relatively easy and expected that your memory could be foggy. But this statement, with all the political implications of this statement, I must, in the firmest of ways, say that the memory, if what is here is what Mr. Mirage said, and the guardian got it correctly, this is completely incorrect. Firstly, let me tell you something. This is a copy of a resolution placed on the floor of a PNM convention held at Chaguaramas in 2011. And that resolution was in support of the effort that was taking place in Tobago under the Orville London Assembly in order to bring about, and maybe in fact it's important enough for me to read it for you. Whereas the Tobago House of Assembly appointed a special select committee to review the Tobago House of Assembly Act No. 40 of 1996, and also to review the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago, with special reference to a Tobago position on the reform of the Constitution. And whereas the special committee, after extensive consultation with individuals, groups, committees, and political parties in Tobago, prepared a report which was forwarded to the Senior Council to guide the drafting process to revise the THA Act and attendant amendments to the Constitution in order to define Tobago's objectives for full internal self-government. And whereas Senior Council has proposed draft amendments to the Tobago House of Assembly Act and the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and whereas the committee has indicated that the draft documents should be subject to public comment, after which a bill will be drafted and debated in the Tobago House of Assembly before transmission to the Cabinet and then to the Parliament for debate and approval, be it resolved that the Convention of the People's National Movement reiterates its support for the process thus far and indicates its continued support for the process to be continued to conclusion as outlined by the Tobago House of Assembly. This resolution was adopted by a PNM convention on the 20th of March 2011 at a convention in Chaguaramas. At our 45th convention, a similar resolution was adopted on the 16th of November 2014 in the Queen's Park Savannah, where the PNM met in convention. And that is the PNM's record on this issue. Now, what happened in the Parliament, as Mr. Ramesh Mirage points out there, 2 bills came to the Parliament. And according to him, the bill, which is a position you put to the Parliament, which if the Parliament agrees, becomes an act, becomes law. If you take what Mr. Mirage has said there as fact, that they came to the Parliament with a bill to give Tobago full internal self-government, but because the PNM didn't agree, the bill had to be amended, and therefore what came out as the act is what they didn't want, because the PNM didn't agree. That sounds good, eh? That's not the story. There were 2 bills that came to the Parliament. One was this one, number 34 of 1996. A bill, an act to repeal and replace the Tobago House of Assembly Act 2503, to provide for membership powers and function of the Assembly and its Executive Council and matters incidental thereto. This was the bill. This, alongside this bill, was an attempt to amend the Constitution. This bill contained, if you look at this bill, find it, members of the media, and find the act that was in fact produced from the bill, because it is the bill that got the act created. You will see that what was in the bill, section 5 to section 11, what was in the bill is exactly what is in the act. So the law that caused the Assembly to function today, to not be able to elect a presiding officer, what was brought to the Parliament in the bill is exactly what was approved. So it is not correct to say that what exists now for this difficulty is as a result of the bill not being supported. Because if you look at it, Section 5, body corporate, in the bill, in the act. Section 6, swearing in of assemblymen, in the bill, in the act. 8, Section 7, election of presiding officer, in the bill, in the act. 8, election of chief secretary and deputy chief secretary, in the bill, in the act. Appointment of minority leader, in the bill, in the act. Appointment of councillors, in the bill, in the act. Election of deputy presiding officer, in the bill, in the act. Election procedure, in the bill, in the act. So it is not correct to say that what exists now causing this deadlock is something that we ended up with in 1996 because the PNM didn't agree. Yes, there was something that the PNM didn't agree with, but take it in the context of Mr. Maraj saying that what he and Mr. Robinson brought to the Parliament was legislation to give Tobago full internal self-government. And what was that? What did they take out from the bill? That had they left it in the bill, it would have required PNM support. If that was left in the bill, what they took out, it would have required a special majority. But there was something in the bill that the PNM didn't agree with, and it was that was taken out, and we have no difficulty in telling you what it was. But what I want you to digest is that according to Mr. Maraj, speaking for Mr. Robinson as well, that which was taken out is what would have given Tobago full internal self-government. So now let us see what that was. It was the Constitution Amendment Bill 1996. Remember I told you there were two bills? One was a bill to amend the THA Act, and one was the Constitution Amendment Bill 1996, accompanied by the THA Bill 1996. So two bills. But in the one to amend the Constitution, which was to give Tobago full internal self-government according to Mr. Maraj, here what was in there and what was taken out, because the PNM didn't agree. The only significant change that was made to that bill to amend the Constitution was a bill that says that Clause 3 of that amendment to the Constitution Bill 1996 proposed to amend Section 40 of the Constitution by increasing the number of senators from 31 to 37. That was the proposal in that bill. They wanted to increase the amount of senators from 31 to 37. By increasing the number of senators from 31 to 37, the number of government senators would have been increased from 16 to 19. And then it requires that at least one of the 9 independent senators would have been appointed by the president in his discretion and would be a resident of Tobago. That was the other provision. And then the president would have been empowered to appoint 2 senators acting in accordance with the advice of the Chief Secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly. And the other part is that the president would be empowered to appoint 1 senator acting in accordance with the advice of the minority leader. That is what was in that bill to amend the Constitution. That is what the PNM did not agree with and did not agree to support. So they wanted to increase the government from 16 to 19. The president would have had 9, but under an amendment, one of the president 9 must have been from Tobago. And the Tobago Assembly would have appointed 3. So 9 plus 3, that is 12, plus the opposition 6, that is 18. So there would have been 19 government senators, 18 others, and in a Senate of 37, the opposition would have had only 6 members. It is that which the PNM objected to and did not support. But interestingly enough, how then could just changing the number of senators have been the giving to Tobago full internal self-government? Is that what full internal self-government is? Increase the government senators from 16 to 19, let the president appoint a Tobagonian resident in Tobago, and let the assembly appoint 3 people. So for the benefit of Tobagonians listening, is that what you have been advocating for as full internal self-government? A restructuring of the Senate, and then at the national level what you would have seen is a Senate of 37 people where the opposition would only have had 6 members. So a PNM opposition objected to that, did not support it, and because to change the Senate would have required a special majority, when the PNM did not support this with its vote, that special majority could not have been had, and therefore they had to take that out. And that is how the Senate wasn't increased to 19 for the government, 9 for the president with 1 Tobago included, and the assembly appointing 3. How then could you come now and say that the problem that they are facing now with the deadlock is as a result of the PNM not supporting a bill that was brought for internal self-government? I would like to ask my former colleague to go back to the Hansard, and when he goes back to the Hansard, he will see where he himself is saying that the bill before the House has the support of the opposition. And he was talking there about the bill with respect to the Tobago House of Assembly Act. He could not have been speaking about the amendment to the Constitution to do what I just told you, because that support was not there. But the support to create the amendment to the Tobago House of Assembly Act, that Attorney General is on Hansard saying that the support of the opposition is available for that. So I just want to make the record very clear so that nobody could go and say that the bill which came into law, which is the law that is operating today in the THA, is as a result of PNM opposition. As a matter of fact, when that came for the vote in the parliament, the vote was 34 for and 0 against. That was the vote. 34 for, 0 against the amendment to the Tobago House of Assembly Act. It was an amendment to the Constitution to change the Senate, where the PNM support was not had. And that, as I beg to differ, that is not full internal self-government. Because we could do that today, if that is what Tobagonians will say they want, as full internal self-government. 4 senators, 1 appointed by the president, 3 by the assembly, 2 by the majority, and 1 by the minority. There's a bill before the parliament now. What the PNM Convention acknowledged was the work that was done by Orville London's team. The law to be drafted, that was done. It came to the cabinet, that was done. It went to the parliament, that is being done. It is now before a joint select committee of the parliament, and a huge amount of changes, major changes, are now before the parliament, way beyond any tinkering with the Senate. So if I am to take Mr. Miraj's comment in The Guardian, I will say this is the first time that there's any real attempt at legislating full internal self-government, what is now before the parliament. And only yesterday, I've seen it in the papers, again misguiding, that the bill had lapsed. And I heard politicians in Tobago saying that the bill had lapsed. The bill had never lapsed. We took steps along the way between 2018 and now to ensure that the bill stays alive and well and the work is preserved and going on. All of 2019, there was huge consultations among that in the parliament, in the Joint Select Committee. Then came COVID in 2020, and of course, you know the effect that COVID had. Once the parliament started functioning again, that is there before. And only yesterday, the parliament took steps to extend the life of that committee, which is working alive and well, until May, to continue this work. This is the first time that any significant attempt is being made in the parliament to make the kinds of changes that would give Tobago that full internal self-government. So if there was any thought in 1996 that full internal self-government was a handful of senators, I'm saying the PNM knew differently. And we always, right? And I'm saying that I'm able to quote for you here from a party convention. I defy any other political party or any other person speaking for anybody else in this country to say that they have that on their record. 2 conventions, our 43rd and our 45th, where this issue was on our record, supported by resolutions binding the party to that. And that is why a PNM cabinet could have gone with the work done in Tobago, widespread consultation, take it untouched to the parliament, put it in committee, and the committee is working. Government, opposition, and independence. And now the life has been extended until May of 2021. So that takes care of that. And if you want a shortcut, go and look at the amendments made to the bill to amend the THA Act in 1996, and you will see what amendments were made and what the impact of each amendment is, and you will find nothing there to deal with full internal self-government or electing officers in the assembly. Nothing. None of those amendments. There are amendments to do with provides for the appointment of a minority leader, councillors now made by the president and the advice of chief secretary and minority leader, qualification of membership, place members of the assembly, salary, change in the legislative language, removed, so that the assembly for matters with central government retain responsibility. That was the amendment to the bill to amend the Tobago House of Assembly Act, which had the full support of the PNM, and that act is now the one that is functioning, and as of today, we can speak about deadlock. I suspect, I suspect that if my colleague, the former Attorney General, had done what I had to do for the last 2 days, he would not have been quoted in the way he has been quoted here, which can be easily refuted by the records of the Parliament. I have sought legal advice. The minute the results came in on Monday night, I realized that as Prime Minister, I had to have sound legal advice. I had been in touch with the Attorney General and Senior Counsel by way of the Attorney General to determine what is the nature of the problem, how is the problem likely to evolve, and how it can be rectified as the relevant aspects of that evolution takes place. The second step took place today. We had the president swearing in those who were elected on election day. So we have 12 assemblymen as per the Act. And if you go to Section 6, the swearing in that would have taken place, we got to the election of a presiding officer. And of course, the votes in the assembly of assemblymen. Because you see, the Tobago House of Assembly Act is very specific to the Tobago House of Assembly. And therefore, the steps are spelled out in there. And it makes provision for certain things. And the legal advice that I have allows me to wait, because just like the Parliament regulates its own business, the Tobago House of Assembly, being a Parliament, regulates its own business, and we have to wait and see how they do it going forward. And they may get to a position, one way or the other. They may solve it. They may solve it without recourse to others, or they may require recourse to something else. Because of the specificity of how the Assembly progresses in conducting this business, the deadlock gives them very little room, which is why you probably would have seen to the article I quoted from The Guardian, you would have seen other voices referring to, how is it put, fresh elections, because they are not seeing a way out. Because when you mix politics with the law, they're not seeing a way out. I know there are many people who are seeing it with rose-tinted glasses, that it could be done in this beautiful way of people, kumbaya, getting it done. It doesn't operate so in politics. There are two political parties in the House with equal number of seats, and as far as I saw today in the attempt to elect presiding officer, no 6 is larger than another 6. So we await that. And there's no role for the Prime Minister, and as of today, the President, unless the Assembly achieves what the Act says should be achieved, which is the selection of a presiding officer, selection of a Chief Secretary, selection of a Deputy Chief Secretary, and of course, a minority leader. And of course, it brings you to the point of who is the minority in 6 versus 6, and so on. So these developments will take place in the days ahead, and we are a functioning democracy. We have a functioning parliament. What we don't have is a functioning Tobago House of Assembly. What we have is an executive, just like the parliament, where ministers stay in office, even though they didn't run for election or they lost their seat or whatever the case might be. But ministers stay in office, in the case of ministers, until a prime minister is elected. Once a prime minister is not selected, the ministers hold their position. The same thing applies in Tobago, that the Executive Council would stay in place to conduct the business of Tobago at the executive level, while the Parliament seeks to try to make the change that the election was to have brought about. So as of today, the PNM through Chief Secretary Ansel Dennis and his assembly team, which was there prior to election day, they will remain in office until this matter at the Parliament, at the THA, and by Parliament here I'm referring to the local parliamentary arm of Tobago, the THA. Until they settle that, they stay in place. I don't anticipate that those involved, it's not something that we anticipate that they will be there for 4 years. And an interesting thing has come to the fore as we examine the law. Even if they were able to come together in the chamber and to want to go towards an electoral fix. The assembly is what is required to dissolve the assembly. Unlike where the Prime Minister calls the election, the Chief Secretary can't call an election in the THA. It takes the assembly to pass a resolution to dissolve the assembly. But you can't dissolve what doesn't exist. And another peculiarity in Tobago is that while you would by election have elected 12 assemblymen, that is not the constituted body of the Tobago House of Assembly. For the Tobago House of Assembly to be properly constituted to do anything, even dissolving itself, it requires that the councillors are appointed by the Chief Secretary or by the presiding officer on the advice of the Chief Secretary. So if you're having difficulty choosing a presiding officer, and if you go further and having difficulty choosing a Chief Secretary, and all the way down to not being able to choose the councillors, what in effect is happening from the goalpost first is that you cannot put the assembly in place as a body required by law. So there's no functioning electoral body, legislative body in Tobago because you can't get past the first step. And my good friend, Senior Counsel Lawrence Mirage, that has nothing to do with the PNM and the law. You take credit for the law, some people will say it's a camel, but it's supposed to have been a horse designed by a committee. And we have to wait to see what happens with that. So I would, as Prime Minister, I always tell you all I don't advise myself. I am being advised by sound legal input at the level of Senior Counsel, and we will observe. But I trust that very soon all the parties in Tobago would realize what has to be done, find a way to get it done, and we fix whatever problem they have either in Tobago. And if the Parliament is required, the government stands ready to approach the Parliament to fix whatever problem exists with the Tobago Parliament. So thank you very much, and if you have questions, I can take a few of your questions now.
Prime Minister, is there a specific deadline that you would give the THAs according to the legislation? Is there a deadline by which they have to come to some resolution?
No. The only person who has had a deadline for doing something was the President, and even so, it says as, I think the exact words is as soon as it's practical. The President was required to swear in those 12 people who on election day, the EBC signed off as persons who have won seats. And then the President was required to do that within 3 days or as soon as it's practical. So the President has done that. I mean, if there was a hurricane the day after or an earthquake, he couldn't do it, but so the law says as soon as it's practical. It was practical for her to do it, it was done, so now it falls to the Assembly. There's no deadline elsewhere, like say at the Parliament or the government, to tell this Assembly to hurry up or to get it done by any particular day. So they will have to assemble themselves and see how much good sense will prevail.
So you're saying that if needs be, you will take it to Parliament to amend at some point?
If it comes to that, if the rectification of whatever problem they might be facing in Tobago, if that rectification involves the Parliament, then it will involve the government taking that rectification to the Parliament. That's the only avenue.
At this stage, do you have any idea of what recommendations could be made to amend the Act so that this does not happen again?
Yes, but I'll prefer to hold my counsel on that and let the Assembly conduct its business, and we will all see, as we saw this morning, how they do. And as I said, I use the word evolve. Let us see what evolves out of it. But I don't want as Prime Minister to comment in any way to give the impression that the government is either involved or anticipating. If it comes to us from Tobago as a solution, then, because as I said, if they find no solution, the incumbents remain in office. It might not be the best way, that would not be good governance, but it is an interregnum that we have to live with, as we have lived with at the level of the the 1818 at national level. I remember when it was 1818, I remember days upon days and weeks upon weeks. The appointed cabinet, the Manning cabinet, I was a member of that cabinet, and we used to meet at the Hilton for months. We used to meet on Monday afternoons, myself, Patrick Manning, Bazio Pandey, Gerard Yetning, trying to find a solution. We never found one. But in the meantime, the cabinet as appointed functioned until we got to the polls. So this is a Tobago issue, and the Tobago component, will, for the time being, all kinds of suggestions and proposals will be advanced. We'll see what survives in the end.
Prime Minister, good afternoon. Orbishi from TV6. It's a few weeks since your health scare. Just to find out from you, how are you feeling?
How I'm feeling? I went to the golf course this morning and I beat some people. I just told you. Excuse me. I was in Tobago. I was in Tobago last week. And I did also go to the golf course, and I did win. So, I'm doing grateful. I'm grateful that I'm doing as well as I am. I am doing pretty well. I'm on medication, and I'm taking my medication as prescribed by my doctors, who have done a very good job with me. And so far, I am feeling very good. In fact, I have been working much harder in the last few days than before I had my medical procedure, because, with these Caricom things, it involves a whole lot more work. As chairman of Caricom, I have to be consulting with a wider body and getting things through. I can't go off on my own and take positions. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is very active. I don't know if you were told by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we have appointed a Caricom ambassador, former Permanent Secretary Signoret, who is the Caricom ambassador functioning at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I'm sure that would have been noticed sometime before. And so we, Trinidad and Tobago, with the government, we are very busy, not only with our national problems. Now we have our Tobago additions to it, and then we have Caricom, and of course, that is when you have the issue flaring up in Venezuela and Guyana. As you may remember, the Secretariat of Caricom is in Georgetown in Guyana. So we are very engaged all around. And much to some people wouldn't understand this. We have been in constant communication with the government of Venezuela, because these are issues that we have to, Yesterday, I heard my opposition colleague once again on this foolishness about Delcy Rodriguez coming to Trinidad and Tobago. Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president of Venezuela, a government that is recognized by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And somehow, our opposition here sees a problem with the government talking to Venezuela. Now that Venezuela have locked horns over territorial dispute, I wonder who they want me to talk to now as chairman of Caricom. Who should I talk to now? And I'll go further. This issue of the flare-up between Venezuela and Guyana on territorial dispute came up at the OAS. And guess who is in support of the Maduro government position standing against Guyana in this matter? The representative for President Guaido. So the Venezuelan position, government and opposition at the OAS, is opposed to Guyana's position. And of course, as chairman of Caricom, Guyana's position is of interest to us, and our position, even before these recent developments, and at Caricom, that's clear what our position is. And of course, we keep talking to the Venezuelans along those lines.
Back to Tobago, Chief Secretary Mr. Dennis has signaled that he would be reaching out to you. Do you think at this point you would also require the PDP to reach out to you before?
Well, Mr. Dennis is under law required to, and I am under law required to consult with the Chief Secretary. So that is a given. I am not under any obligation to get involved with anybody else. And of course, you know, I've heard other people's opinion through you, the media. And as I said, we have a functioning government. We have a functioning parliament. What we don't have is a functioning Tobago House of Assembly. And that right now is in the hands of the Tobagonians who their representatives as elected in the last election last Monday. It's not the first time that would happen anywhere in the world. I mean, in Italy, there are times when sometimes for months, in Israel, for months, the government cannot be formed because the politicians cannot come to an agreement, and sometimes they have to go back to the polls. Sometimes they form a government that can't survive. Sometimes the person who was being asked to form a government didn't succeed, so the president asked somebody else, depending on how their laws are written. The THA Act is not written like that. The THA Act is very specific that the Chief Secretary would be appointed from the assemblymen. So other people are basically onlookers and advisors, and there's a lot of advice going on, as you would see.
Mr. Prime Minister, with respect to the decision to reopen schools, it comes as COPA only today called for enhanced vigilance with respect to the new UK variant. And if I may also add, there's these two new variants in Brazil, Venezuela, Trinidad. I mean, how?
Well, let's put it this way. After 1 year of dealing with this virus, I think by now we all have come to the conclusion that we are living with a virus. The circumstances in Trinidad and Tobago permit us to do that. If those circumstances change, we most certainly will respond. I have seen today, in my monitoring of the global scene, I have seen today that the South African variant has now been identified in our part of the world, in the Western Hemisphere, I think in the United States. So the South African variant is in the US, it's not here with us. The British variant has just arrived. We have one example. But basically what we're doing, we're trying to live with the virus in a safe way. We are assessing our risk, and we are taking that risk in a careful manner, but it's called risk. If we bring those students out, as we are going to do, given what we have now as our level of infection, if those circumstances change, of course, we will have to revisit that position. But if they change for the better, we may end up bringing more students out, and that would be a good position to be in. But that can only happen if we continue to respect the threat that the virus. I saw some police work recently with 100 people in a party in a downscale environment, you know, where people just think they have to party. These are people, as we say in Tobago, stick breaking their ears. And such people would only react sensibly when they come face to face with possibly bereavements in their own family. There's nothing else I could say. What else? I've been at this podium for a year, pleading, beseeching people to be sensible, but you have to party. Because you somehow feel that you will party and have a wonderful time, and somebody else will catch the COVID, and somebody else will be it could easily be you. And I guess that's only then will they respect the threat that we're facing. And I don't think that is sensible. I think that is, you know, folly on steroids. And some people in this country, unfortunately, like every other country, I presume, believe that they are entitled to behave in a particular way because of who they are, and that the threat is not to them. That is a behavior that puts all of us at risk, because the virus is no respecter of persons, race, class, religion, color, or bank account. It calls for good human common sense. And maybe what the virus is trying to teach us worldwide is that we are all human beings. We have classified ourselves into who better than who. But I do not know yet, I have not seen anywhere in the scientific literature that any category of persons by virtue of their biology, or the economic circumstance, or their phenotypical expression, which is their color, or their hair, or their height, or where they come from, because it's all over the world. There's no country in the world that can say that it's a cold environment, so we're not affected, or a hot environment, so we're not affected, and vice versa. The whole world, even those who thought they had beaten it, eventually, you see some of those countries had to respond in ways which were even more drastic than we have had to when we started out. So I'm simply appealing again for common sense, and especially now that we are bringing some of our students out. Because right now, the abnormality in our country is closed schools, half filling of restaurants and bars and so on, and a closed border. Other than that, we are pretty much operating normally. A lot of the talk, a lot of the opportunities to make mischief is with the closed border. A lot of pressure came on the government to open the bars. The bars are still open, but what you're not allowed to do is to congregate and socialize and drink. Right? The manufacturing is open. Energy sector is open. Right? The biggest chunk of the population that is affected is that school population. And of course, a lot of negatives are going with the fact that the children are not able to grow, socialize, and to be educated. Many children are struggling to be educated. Some are coping. And of course, we are doing better and better as we go forward. But that the virus caught us unprepared to treat with an environment where children could not go to school. We try to do the best we can in terms of keeping them engaged, keeping them schooled, and in a different kind of way, but that is not a substitute for them in their social development at school. If we are able to safely manage our borders, as we have been doing, and to keep our infection levels down, as we have been doing, following the protocols, there's room for improvement there. But by now we should see that what we have done has worked. And if we do a bit more of that, it will work even better. Okay? So let's just hope that our brothers and our sisters and our neighbors, that we all continue to follow those protocols, which have not changed very much since we started out after March. The being very sanitary, washing your hands, keeping clean, staying away from gatherings, wearing your mask, because what has happened, I remember we all used to laugh at Sean when Sean was the only person wearing a mask in here. Before masks were deemed to be so valuable, we were seeing it being used in China and in Korea initially, but we here were thinking that, well, it was just because, you know, they had the tradition of doing that out there. And of course, so Sean got the prize for being the first person wearing a mask consistently in this room. And now we eventually got to the point we asked that it be worn. We wouldn't take none very seriously. We had to make it law. Some people are now getting themselves fined, you know, for it. But I'm appealing to the population to be sensible. If you're out in the open alone and you want to have your mask off, you know you're alone, then you can do that. But once you are around other people, and especially if you're out in the public spaces, you have by law to have the mask on. Right? And of course, don't encourage unwanted gatherings, even in your family. Don't encourage unwanted gatherings in your family. Use the phone contact. Right? But, you know, this is 2021. It's an unusual year. 2020 is a year that's forgettable, but it didn't let us forget it. We'll never forget it. And we hope that we never go back to do in 2021 what we had to do in 2020. It's very expensive and it's very dangerous. Okay? Yes, Abdashi.
To Tobago, there's some suspicion that some sort of brokering is taking place with regards to having one of the assemblymen cross the floor. Is this something that the PNM ascribes to?
It doesn't take much for anybody to come up with that suspicion. I know of no such. I know of no such, so I can help you with that. But I mean, it's happened in the Parliament at times, but as I speak to you now, I know of no such situation. Well, as I said, I am not at this point going to express an opinion on that, because that opinion would become part of the conversation and the suspicions, as you just mentioned. But I would leave it for the big House of Assembly to work its way out of this basket. Thank you all very much, and look forward to seeing you again very soon. And thank you for your inquiry after my health. I'm doing well. Thank you.